This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.
Good evening. My name is Joe Sam Robinson. It's my pleasure to have with us tonight Mr. Bug Melton. Welcome,
Greetings.
Bug. You've been here many times before. We've had discussions on different issues, generally connected to the American legal system and how that plays itself out as we go through our life. We've had a very major, event that's occurred in Baltimore. There's been tremendous tension there. It's been, I guess you could say, a substantial domestic upheaval. There's been lots of tensions that have arisen. And maybe we could talk a little bit about that and the rights of the respective people involved in these interchanges. So I guess we could start with Mr. Gray. Maybe just discuss the legal issues that occurred there. And I think if you could say this, the community believes that the state, the police, are acting very inappropriately toward them. They're abusing their rights. They're impinging on their freedom, and that protest change is a very justifiable and necessary thing, et cetera, et cetera. But maybe we could start with just the actual incident that, as best we can determine, caused this.
Yes, well, the police were in a high-crime area. Freddie Gray obviously was black. He saw the police. He ran. The police chased him down, found a switchblade in his pocket. There's a dispute as to whether or not he got tased or not, but there is video taken by a bystander where the police are picking him up off the ground and half dragging him to the police van.
Yes.
And then the police van goes to the jail, and when it arrives, Freddie Gray is comatose with most of his spinal cord sliced through, and he's injured and dies some days later. That's the basic scenario as I understand it.
Yes.
So the question is, how on earth did he sustain those injuries, and what, if anything, did the policemen do about it? What did they do to cause it, or what did they do to not prevent it from happening?
Well, now let's discuss that. So we have the interchange that takes place between a policeman and a citizen on the street.
Yes.
So there's just walking around, and this is something of substantial consequences. We have a more urban world out there. We want a just society. We have to balance different rights and responsibilities. But if you're walking down the street and a policeman sees you, does the policeman have the right to stop and question you, or just walking down the street? And it seems to be a common complaint. And if you're a black person and you live in a tough neighborhood and the police walk by, they might just use the word harass you or do something, frisk,
for the crime of being black.
That's right.
Yes.
So, and that seems to be a major sense of aggrievement. Now, what about that? Can you just stop a person walking down the street and search them?
There's got to be some sort of reasonable suspicion of some sort of criminal activity or a probable cause, more than just a hunch. If the policeman is in fear of some danger, he can frisk the subject. If he thinks that this is a criminal and but there's got to be more than a hunch, more than just he's black, so he must be a criminal kind of thing.
So what happens if you're walking down the street and you're just whistling, looking out, looking at the birds as they fly by, and then suddenly the police say, "Okay, that's it. What's your name? Where are you going? Why are you here?" Is that illegal? What happens if that? Firstly, does the policeman have the right to ask that? And what can a citizen say about that? Can he say, "No"?
Are you detaining me, or am I free to leave? And that sort of puts the policeman on notice to put up or shut up.
Do you have to answer a policeman if he asks, "What are you doing here"?
I don't believe so. Now, once again, if you run into a situation where you may be committing the crime of loitering, which is hanging around, that this is, or driving with a busted
Well,
taillight.
is that too much of a? Is that too far to say you're loitering? I mean, it sounds.
Well, that's the law that's on the books. So yeah,
I mean, is that pretty vague? I mean, that means almost
yes,
anybody.
of course.
If you're walking down the street, does that mean anybody could be arrested at any time on that charge? And is that a misdemeanor?
Not if you're white. I think obviously. So,
well, I mean, no. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's possible. You're a university, confrontation.
Yes.
You know,
True,
outside the big, whatever it is, the police come and they
Yes.
just arrest anybody that happens to be around.
It would depend on the totality of circumstances. If you've got clear identification that a black male just pulled a gun on somebody else in a
Yes.
in a 24-hour shop or something, and he's dressed like you, and the build is like you, and he's got a beard and you've got a beard.
We have to have some kind of. So what I'm getting at, I guess, is there has to be some reason the police. If a citizen is just the person is asked whatever, the person has no responsibility to respond to the policeman's query, does he?
Well, not that I'm aware of, and not that I'm giving any legal advice
Yes.
here, but no. But let's escalate it to the Freddie Gray case. Let's say the policemen have nothing at all on Freddie Gray except the fact that this is a high crime neighborhood. And when Freddie Gray sees the policeman, he turns and runs. And there is no other justification at all. Is that reasonable grounds to believe that Freddie Gray may be doing something illegal? The Supreme Court has actually said, not in his case, but in an earlier case, the fact that somebody turns and runs when he sees a policeman might be an indication that you've got reasonable grounds to believe he's breaking the law, and that would justify a stop.
Or pursuit.
Or pursuit, certainly.
And now, we get into this question. I mean, I don't want to opine too much on the subject, but it looked to me, as Mr. Gray was being put in the police van, that he already had sustained at that point a very substantial injury. Prior, I mean, that's the way it appeared to me, that he'd already had a very substantial injury, so to his neck and presumably his.
And this is a professional opinion we're hearing.
Well, I mean, yeah. How about
from
that?
what you can get, you weren't on the scene, but from what you could see.
It was very. I mean, most people walk when they. I mean, it appeared to me just glancing that it was already. We'll see what the facts are when they appear.
Yes. Could it have been due to maybe head trauma? He's unconscious as opposed to a spinal injury, or
I just wonder what I'm getting into. I guess is if you're pursuing a person, now presumably using deadly force in the pursuit, the person just runs, and the policeman is chasing the person. Now, is the person entitled to use deadly force, shoot the person, or what? Any comments on that?
Generally speaking, I think that standard police procedure, and this may vary slightly from agency to agency, but generally speaking, the policeman can only escalate slightly above whatever force is being used against him. So if
the person is running, obviously there's no.
Exactly, that's the hands up, don't shoot scenario.
Could you tase a person that was running away? I mean, and presumably this is I mean, I don't want to understate how difficult it is to be a policeman. These must be very, very. It's an understatement. Really a tough job.
And you've got to make these split-second decisions. The other guy's got the initiative.
Who knows what's up? I mean, it's just a very difficult arrangement. But could you, presumably, I don't know what procedure would be, but I mean, the use of non-deadly force. Could you tase a person, or?
I think it would depend on the circumstance. Once again, and when I'm teaching law classes, when I teach first-year law students, I always tell them that whatever the question is, your answer is likely. It depends. But let's say, obviously,
so it's a good thing for life, anyway.
Yes, but obviously, if you are running away from the policeman is not himself in fear of having deadly force inflicted upon him. But what if the suspect who is running has got a weapon in his hand and has already discharged it? So maybe to defend others, you would be justified in stopping his escape by tasing.
So, I mean, okay, not a tase. What about I mean, I don't know any of the facts of the case, and they're not evident to anyone at this point, but if there's some effort to subdue the person. So, hands up, we've got you. So the policeman tackles the fleeing person, and maybe at that point the neck is broken, tackles him, or they fall off a wall, or what happens under those circumstances? I mean, seemingly, maybe that just these things happen. It's the risk the person took when he ran. If it is an accidental kind of just you tackle a person, they break their neck with that.
Exactly. I would say if there's nothing intrinsically dangerous to X level about tackling, and just something happened, some freak event happened. And I would say probably there's no culpability there on the part of the policeman. But on the other hand, if you're using an illegal thing like a chokehold, which apparently is banned in New York City, or something that is grossly disproportionate, a drunk swings at you clumsily, and you result by pulling out an automatic and shooting him 5 times. Obviously you have greatly escalated the situation there. So, once again, it depends very much on the circumstance. But in this case, let's move on to the next one where you've already got him subdued. And then what happens?
Well, that's the point is, so maybe who knows what occurred, but seemingly what happens is that he was having respiratory distress, he couldn't move, and the police weren't responding to his sense physical injury. And maybe that's just a training story, or what? Is that how that seems to be? They've gone over the line. The person has all these issues. They're injured. The police have some responsibility.
Yes.
How does that play itself out in regards? Is that a training issue?
I would say it's a training issue. That once you've got, and even if you've got someone who is uninjured and completely conscious, but he has now got his hands handcuffed behind his back. He is no longer stable. He can't reach out to regain his balance. At that point, the policemen have a duty to help him and take care of him and make sure that nothing happens. So obviously, if you're sustaining grievous injuries, once you can no longer protect yourself, and those injuries are disproportionate to whatever force that you have threatened policemen with, you got a major problem.
So if you're in custody of the police or law enforcement, and any kind of physical ailment that requires attention, then the police have a responsibility to make sure that physical ailment is dealt with.
Yes.
And then what right does a person have if that's not the case? For instance, you can imagine a person would be in police custody and go into diabetic coma.
Yes.
And it was
which happens sometimes.
Yeah, and had some terrible injury. Well, can the police be sued? What is the standard? What I'm getting at is, have the courts said what is the standard of care for prisoners in police custody?
Yes.
How do they have to act? And
yes. Well, this isn't an area that I practice in, but I would say just using the traditional rules of any tort law, you've got 4 things to be able to show negligence. Number 1, a duty. Number 2, a breach of that duty. Number 3, a causal link between your breach of that duty and the injury that is sustained. And finally, a policy-based ruling on whether or not it's called proximate cause, whether or not there is a close enough relationship between your breach of duty and what happened there.
And so what happens is, presumably the courts are going to intervene and give people a lot of money, or whatever. They're going to try and make things right. And so it appears extremely common that when something like this occurs, that the police are sued, there's litigation on the issue.
Yes.
So that is a recourse if that occurs.
Yes, that is a recourse. And of course, the damages that you're seeking in that circumstance are often going to be for at least a couple of reasons. Number 1, if there's medical care involved, or injury or rehabilitation, or loss of ability to work, or pain and suffering, the courts will attempt to put a dollar value on any or all of that. Or even if the person dies, Freddie Gray is dead, how much, it's a callous thing, but how much was his life worth in money terms? But secondly, punitive damages to try to deter the police from doing this sort of thing again in the future, to make them think twice. And that can be a lot of money.
Now, that seems to be, the courts have some kind of recourse. So, and if a society is saying, okay, we're going to, besides everything else the policeman has to do when he goes into a very tense situation, there's a whole nother litany of duties that the policeman is going to have to be aware of when these interchanges take place.
Yes.
And if on the other side of the equation, the person that's being tackled or whatever also is doing all kinds of other things. I mean, it could be screaming obscenities, making threatening gestures. The police could just be just accosted every minute with some kind of difficult situation. And so people would say, well, look, it's impossible for me to function under these environments. If I have to, the person says I have a headache or whatever, and so what happens is the quality of the police drop. I mean, the idea is that the situations require often vigorous police presence, and if the vigorous police presence is not there, the situation really rapidly.
There's that too. It's a rough job. There's another consideration as well, and it's the other side, and I suppose I can make an assumption of risk argument. I'm a policeman, I'm there, I've got my partner right there with you, and we have very clearly told you, you are under arrest, do not move, and you continue to fight me, then have you not taken upon yourself some of the responsibility for what you're doing? You're faced by the authority with the authority of the state there. What do you do?
Another issue might be, I mean, it's a complicated story, and I mean, these are just things to think about. But if there's a substantial drug culture, and so the police are dealing with people that are on some kind of street drug, they're not going to be rational people to chat with. So if you're attempting to go through some kind of reasoning arrangement with a person that seems to be berserk, I mean, it's and you suspect almost everyone that you've encountered has been irrational, and the street drugs are endemic. So that really complicates the policeman's role.
It does, and that is why the policemen are always allowed to escalate one step above wherever the suspect or person in custody is. So it's the classic, in my best Sean Connery voice, he pulls a knife, you pull a gun. So, but it's that standard operating procedure. Once again, if he throws a drunken swing at you, you can't plug him with 10 shots. So.
Well, just looking at our situation, our national situation, being people, I think, of goodwill, wanting the country to work, we've got all these substantial tensions in our cities. And the question is, what is it that could be done and should be done, I mean, in these circumstances? And you don't have to look far to see many aggrieved populations. The system is, whose fault is it? You could ask that question. No matter whose fault it is, there's substantial groups of people that are not related or not connected with the general civil group. When say it that way, they feel isolated, and it's a substantial problem. I don't know if there's any ready answer to that. We've had discussions about marriage. I mean, from a sociological point of view, I mean, it appears that a lot of what's going on is just a very disordered family circumstances. We've had papers on that subject for 50 years. I
also think it's anonymity, that as the community gets bigger and bigger and you do not know the people who are in charge. I mean, if you take the small town situation of 200 years ago, where everyone knows the constable, and the constable is the representative of the people, and the people are human beings whom you know and have a face on, as opposed to the essentially adversarial relationship between the vast mass of faceless people and the large group of faceless government functionaries, bureaucrats, and elected officials. The police, especially when they start dressing like soldiers and having weapons that are military in nature, they become
an occupying force.
You took the words out of my mouth. That's what I was going to say. And how do you deal with that? I mean, it's not Barney Fife anymore. So,
well, what about community policing? I mean, not that I'm an expert on the subject, but the idea is you have
you embed police in the
and they're walking around, and their job is to walk down the street and say, "Is everything okay? You're doing okay? Hi, what's the dog's name? I'm here. You call me. Here's my card. If you have any problems."
It increases trust. It increases respect for law enforcement. It gives the community a sense of input, of value, of having skin in the game. I think it's a terrific idea. I just don't know how you get us onto that track based on where we are now.
Now, isn't the culture just the problem we have? I can phrase it this way. You have a large urban center, And the people in there have had lots of difficulties in the world. There's many I guess disordered family arrangements that are there.
Yes.
And the education system, if you want to say it, for whatever reason, who knows what the story is, but people that go through that education system, the vast number of them are either, for whatever reason, ill-equipped to just participate in normal employment activities. So the employment activities that exist, if you're an aggressive young male, particularly with that Y chromosome, is there doing something, many people have a problem about just accepting some kind of lower level traditional job, and the idea of being able to be a big kingpin and either in some kind of gang arrangement or some kind of drug issue is so powerful that that's almost a given. And so if we have the community policing and all the nice things we'd like to have present in that environment, maybe the environment just makes it impossible to have that happen. I mean,
and that's a major concern. And you get down to so many problems. The fact that we export jobs, the fact that we don't put enough money into our public education systems, the fact that the inner cities industry and jobs are moving out of the inner cities. I mean, there's so many problems, and you'd have to deal with all of them to some degree.
So just to talk about it, I mean, just on one small thing, the idea that this is the way traditional economics works, comparative advantage. So we're going to do a deal with Mexico, and we'll send our computers there, and the Mexican people will send us, I don't know, cotton goods back. We'll have our blue jeans will come back from Mexico, and that makes things work. But what's not considered is the sociological damage that occurs if we take that textile manufacturing facility and we put it somewhere else. Well, that's an entry-level job, and it might make blue jeans somewhat more expensive, but that's not being considered when these trade arrangements are being propagated.
And that expense is, if nothing else, an investment in our own society. And
so you could say, there's an argument for some kind of tariff protection.
Yes.
Or having some kind of appropriate work for people that's leaving the country. And I think in looking at the Baltimore situation, my understanding is that 50 years ago, the population of Baltimore was 1 million people. It had this tremendous dynamic. It was a great city. It was just one of our most important cities, one of the most populous, progressive, all kinds of good things there.
And now,
and then the question to ask is what's happened. And there are many things that have happened, but at least some jobs were exported. That's at least one thing.
I think a great many jobs were exported. So, and this is a problem that I think neither party faces. The unions won't ever hire wages that make them non-competitive, and I'm all for wanting to push for as good a terms as you can get. But if you set the bar too high and want too big a cut of the pie, then management won't play and your jobs go. And management, on its part, is perfectly happy to send those jobs to the third world, where somebody will work for 1/10 of the wages of the American worker. What are we to do?
Looking at, so just to ask the question, is that if someone, maybe this is our educational system. The idea is that, well, I don't know, we're going to find a nice job for you as a poet, whatever. You can go through a major in English, become a great poet, or whatever the story is. But I think the Germans do better. They've got a sort of trade school arrangement, so you can really learn trade. You can, and the sense of respect is extremely high. So you're a tradesman, and I think the same with the Japanese. I do whatever I do. I pick your job. I repair televisions, and I'm just really good at this. And when I do it, I have my sense of that my thumbprint is on my work here. I take pride in everything I do, whatever the task is.
Why do we look down on this sort of
That's
thing?
That's a good question, isn't it? And so, what I'm getting into, there's a song about respect or whatever. That's the way the song is. But if you're going to put an employment situation in there, maybe society, we have to get some sense of respect and count, and this is a good thing to have done. And it's a two-way street. And I think often what happens, because it's increasing societal tension, is, well, the guys that stole all the liquor they've been excused, and then people are saying, well, we're going to make respect, do this and do that. The other thing that's out there is that if you do go past the 50-yard line, how are we handling that? I mean, what happens if you actually you've committed a crime, and then you're going to go to you're being incarcerated, and presumably in Baltimore, the people that were rioting, a substantial number of people have had prison experience.
Yes.
And is that been a good thing, a bad thing? I mean, how have they been? Has it helped them when they?
I can't imagine anything good about going to prison or being in prison for the person who's being incarcerated.
I think that's a fair statement.
Now, I mean, now going back to Jeremy Bentham, the idea of rehabilitation, of reform, and that's why most of these places, I know it's still done this way in Georgia, the Department of Corrections. We're going to correct your course in life to make you a better person, to make you a contributing member of society. I really don't see that happens very much. I really don't. And I don't know what to do about that either.
Well, some of it may be, and not to get too complicated about it, but there could be some disordered neurochemistry involved here. So substantial numbers of people that have been incarcerated have some degree of mental illness. Very high percentage have mental illness, and there's some cognitive impairment arrangements too. So many people with some degree of cognitive impairment for whatever reason, and they're in this situation. It's difficult to get those people back into an appropriate civil role, and maybe prison makes things worse. So I don't know.
I'm sure it does. They shouldn't have been there to begin with. That normally that prior to the early 1970s, they would have gone to, well, in Georgia it would have been Milledgeville. But then the courts have ruled that not incarceration, but incarceration in a mental health facility violates all sorts of due process rights. So instead, we wait until we've got them for cause for holding up a liquor store or something, and then throw them into the worst possible environment. So that it does not improve things.
And I mean, when civil disorder occurs like this, there are lots of people that are explosive temperaments. They've got whatever their predispositions are. Many of them are wicked. That's a fair thing to say. They have wicked predispositions.
The bad seed
and
concept.
They're waiting for the dogs of war to be loosed. I mean, they're ready for society to break up, and they're joyful when this occurs.
Well, and
maybe anywhere that's the case.
Yeah, and if I could interject, psychopathy, that has an organic cause, does it not?
Yes, it does.
Yeah, it's just. I mean, it's not behavioral. It's something in the brain. So I don't know what do you do about this. One thing we haven't discussed at all, and I know we're running out of time, but what about the ubiquity of cell phone cameras and video cameras now in watching what the police are doing? And I know I'm backtracking a little bit here, but
that's right. And so some of what occurs is, I mean, people have said that police behavior is going to be revolutionized, if it hasn't already, because people have they take pictures everywhere.
Rodney King, that groundbreaking moment.
Right, so. And so suddenly this picture appears, and it's worth money too.
Yes.
So if you claim this happened, so it's going to be very difficult to be a policeman, and as we sort of try to work our way through this, trying to have some just society is very complicated. It requires people of goodwill to try and get together, and it's very easy to be provoked.
It is.
You know, when these confrontations occur, spectators for the confrontations are easily provoked.
Yes, and that's the thing. When you're dealing with one of these problems, everyone is stressed. Everyone is running on adrenaline. How do you deal with something like that?
Well, that's something we need to think more about, just in general, and we have to hope that law will give us some guidance on the situation, as well as whatever cultural figures wish to come forward and opine on this.
And the beat goes on.
Well, Bucky, thank you for coming. We've had a very interesting
Thank you,
interview
sir.
tonight, as usual. Thank you. It doesn't go this way, does it?
This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.